Great to be back with you, and good to see you men, continuing to grow. One of the things about traveling, especially when you're going to new places, and especially in the South, where, really the terrain in northern Florida, and then you get into South Carolina, North Carolina, it's in Tennessee, it's rugged territory. There's ridges of mountains that run through, and so you're following GPS. And it's a wonderful gift, and it's a horrible slave master, because you never know where you are. You're just on that one little line, and you're going, well, where's the next town? Did it actually lead me to Knoxville, or did it lead me to someplace else that I don't want to be? And several times I found myself, almost cursing the GPS, saying, Joanne, get out the map. Show me the bigger picture. Where are we on this planet anyway? And sometimes that's the way it feels when you're reading through the Bible. Because you're going, why is this chapter in here? As a pastor, I think, why can't we have 2 or 3 chapters on some of the hard subjects? Like divorce or warfare or conscientious objection, and here we just have a verse here and a verse there. And then we have a whole chapter about Saul going to the bathroom. And that's what we're doing this morning. But it is the Word of God, and there is something we can learn on this little GPS screen that we see today. And it's part of the larger story, and that's what you're getting as we go through the life of David. You're going to get a larger picture of this man's life. And this is an important one because it shows something of his honor. An honor that he wanted to keep for himself, and nobody else knew about it until he outed it and showed them the kind of man of honor that he is. So let me get you into the picture. In 1 Samuel 23, at the end of the chapter, it says that David was in the stronghold of En-Gedi. So I want to show you where En-Gedi is. It's right next to the Dead Sea, the hottest, lowest place on earth. And if you've ever been there, it is rugged. You wonder how anybody could survive, especially how could an army of men survive on the shore of the Dead Sea. Let me show you some topographical aspect of this. It's the cliffs come right up to the Dead Sea, and it's all caves and shadows and canyons and an occasional oasis. Well, David is here in En-Gedi, and he's hiding out. And it says in the earlier chapters that Saul has had what is called a harmful spirit about David. He really had a jealousy, a fear, a self-preservation. He has DDS. David derangement syndrome. And he's erratic, he's paranoid, he's unhinged, he is disintegrated as he walks through his life. He is completely unhinged about what he's to do and where he's to go and how he's to be the man of God in his situation. Versus David in Psalm 63, which it says, this is when he was in the wilderness of Judah. In other words, he was in a place like En-Gedi. Here's what it says in Psalm 63. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. For you have been my help. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. David was a worshiper. And in the places of the desert, and you often hear that when people talk about a hard time in their life, they say, I was in the desert of my life. Sometimes we go to the desert on purpose, to be alone, to be stripped of all of our amenities, all of our accoutrements and conveniences, just to be alone, to be quiet, to get rid of the noise and to be with the Lord. And that's where David found his consolation. He was stripped of anything. He didn't know what his future was going to be. He knew he was anointed to be the king, but it wasn't yet. And he went to be with the Lord to find his consolation in the Lord's hand upholding him. He was in a peaceful and quiet place. Joanne and I, my wife and I, have been talking a lot about the exhortation in 1 Thessalonians that says to live a peaceful and quiet life in all righteousness. And wondering, what does that mean? It doesn't mean withdrawing from the culture. It doesn't mean being ignorant of everybody. It doesn't mean saying, I don't want to hear this, I can't hear this. I think what it means is there's a place in my life where I'm peaceful and quiet. I have to walk into the noise. I've got tensions in my family. The internet is on fire. The news is full of lies. I have to make a living. I need to walk into this, and it's chaos, but I've got a quiet place I can go. And that's the key to David's whole life, was he knew where that quiet place was, even though at times he left that. Here we see that he has been to that quiet place, and he's found peace with God. You know, some of the richest times of our lives are when we're stripped of all that, and that's where David was. On part of our travels, we went to Asheville, North Carolina, and we toured the Biltmore. You been there? Biltmore is the largest single-family home in America. 250 rooms. George Vanderbilt, who was the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was one of the robber barons and railroads and steel, George inherited part of his father's wealth, and he was a self-made man. He spoke 7 languages. He never went to college, but he was a brilliant guy, traveled all over Europe, and he loved the French castles, and he designed this after many of the architectural wonders he saw in Europe. He started in 1890, and it took 5 years to build it, had 1,000 workers on about 1,200 acres. At one time, he owned 100,000 acres, which he then donated to the National Forest later on. But he built this place, and it is gorgeous. And it took 5 years to build it. He moved in as a bachelor, and then he got married. Can you imagine bringing your wife saying, "Oh, honey, well, I'm not sure where your bedroom is," you know? It's huge and it's beautiful. It's built out of limestone, and but here's the thing. He built this bigger barn, and by age 51, he'd been there for, I think, less than 20 years. He died of a ruptured appendix. And by 1930, so this is 40 years in, they realized this place cannot sustain itself. There's not enough money left in the inheritance. So they had to open it up to tourism. And but I thought, this is the best and the worst of human dominion. I mean, it's amazing. Every door frame has something carved over it. You know, it's just an incredible place. And yet it didn't last. You know, it's that man in the parable, he built bigger barns, and then his soul was required of him. And when I think about what David built in his life, his legacy of honor, his legacy of having a soft heart toward God. When I think about us living our lives and building something that will go beyond the generation that we're in and into the next generation, what will our children and grandchildren talk about regarding us? We're not going to have a chapter in the Bible written about us, but maybe there'll be chapters told around the campfire about their dad or their grandfather who built something because he was a man of honor. And that's really what we want to talk about today. So let's dive into 1 Samuel chapter 24, and let's read the first 4 verses. When Saul returned and from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." And you've seen where that is. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats rock. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said to him, Here is the day of which the Lord has said to you, behold, I will give you your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. Then David rose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. That's an amazing picture. I don't know if you want to picture it or not. Saul comes into the cave to relieve himself. So he takes off his robe and lays it aside, and he's got a squatty potty there in the cave. And David should have come up behind him and said, "Gotcha!" And he would have pooped his pants right there, But that's actually what he was doing. He was relieving himself. He was in a very vulnerable position. And David comes and cuts off a corner of the robe that's laying there. He's like a ninja sneaking up on him and cutting off that robe. And his men are urging him, here's your opportunity, David. Haven't we been thinking about this, praying about this, gossiping about this? This is your opportunity to have the kingdom. Take his life. It's right in our hands. But David doesn't do that. He just cuts off a corner of the robe. And that would seem like a brilliant, clever, very restrained action that David took. That he didn't kill him, that he didn't take advantage of him, he didn't take his life, and that he was waiting for a future time. He didn't heed the advice of his men. Until we get to verse 5. And this is where the passage gets interesting for me. It says in verse 5, and afterwards, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing for my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with those words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. What does it mean that David's heart struck him? What was going on here? Yeah, it was his conscience. Something in his tender conscience said, maybe it looks like to everybody else that I'm restrained, that I'm not taking his life, and that's a heroic act of honor to not do that. But I know that I've crossed the line. I did something here that was out of spite. I did something here that was defiant. I did something here that was prideful, that was mocking. It was kind of an in-your-face threat. And I knew at the time, and I know now, this is not God's timing, and I should not be poking the bear. I should not be provoking the already paranoid. I should be waiting patiently for God's timing for me. I like Henry Cloud's definition of integrity. And David is a man of integrity. He said, integrity is character that meets the demands of reality. It's a simple definition, but one that we need to live out. What is integrity? It's character that meets the demands of reality. And David's reality was that he knew that even though he had spared Saul's life, there was a pridefulness in it. There was a snarkiness in it. There was a threat in it that he wanted to register on his own. And he didn't need to do that. And so it goes on in the passage, and it says this. Afterward, David rose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks your harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against the Lord, against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe, I did not kill you. You may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of ancient says, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it, and plead my cause, and deliver me from your hand. I believe that David goes out and calls to Saul, which I think he would have done anyway, even if he hadn't cut the corner off his robe. But I believe that all this exposition of his heart is as much for Saul as it is for David's own men. They need to hear this, because after all, they were the ones saying, take his life. Now's the time. The circumstances are right. You know, and how many of us often takes, many times God gives us circumstances and we go, this is just the right time. But circumstances are not the only thing that should determine our actions. We also need to look at our principles, our morals, our convictions, the absolutes in the world, because circumstances don't always line up with those. So look what David says, David does, so that his men looking at him will recognize this is our determination. I'm not going to allow any of my men to have any other idea about taking Saul's life. And I think he has this platform. He gets this pulpit to say it. So look at the things he did. He bowed down. He said, I spared you despite the advice that was given to me. You are the Lord's anointed. He called him my father. David was honoring Saul in this. He wanted a relationship with Saul, even though Saul kept giving him the stiff arm and the spear and the sword. He said, I've done no wrong or treason toward you. I've not sinned against you, though you hunt me. The Lord will be the judge, and I think this is the key aspect. The Lord will be the judge, the Lord will avenge, and my hand shall not be against you. The Lord will plead my cause. This is a man of honor. David does the hardest thing in a man's world. He waits. He waits for the right timing. And he does it with a sense of, I will know when that time is because I've been anointed. God has given me the kingdom, but it is not yet. And so it brought me to Psalm 15, which this phrase kept going through my head. Psalm 15 says, O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks, this is a psalm of David, he who walks blamelessly and does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, and does no evil to his neighbors, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord. And here's the key phrase, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. In other words, here's a man who's made a promise. He has sworn to the promise. And he finds out the deal's going to go sour. He's not going to make the profit. He isn't going to get what he signed up to do. But he doesn't break his word. I think that's what we see here in David in chapter 24 of 1 Samuel, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. We stayed with some friends near Knoxville, Tennessee, and they told us about buying their house. They've just been down there for about 3 years, and they found a house. They looked all over the place and finally found a house that they loved. They found the owners. They were a Christian family, and they said, we love your house, and they made a deal, but they hadn't signed any papers. And they made an offer, and then the couple who owned the home, their daughter came and said, Mom and Dad, we'd like to buy the house. But they said, well, we've already made a promise. Well, have you signed the contract? No. But we made a promise, and we're going to keep our promise. It's those kinds of things, men, that God blesses. Making promises to other people. Also, making promises to your own conscience that over this line I won't step. I will heed my own conscience in this way. Well, Saul was humbled. He literally had dodged a bullet. He walked away from David saying, I know that you're the eventual king, and I won't harm you, but make me this promise that you will not kill my children. You won't kill my line in the kingly line. And he said, I promise that. David promised that. But notice how David de-escalates everything. He de-escalates the hostility and the anger because he obeys his conscience. He swears to his own hurt. And there are many places in Scripture where this is kind of indicated. One of them is in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It's talking about lawsuits amongst Christians. And we're not going to get into the nuance of all that. But on the other hand, it says in 1 Corinthians 7, it says, why not rather be wronged if it has to do with upholding the honor of Christ? In Hebrews 11, we find after we read about all the heroes, we find about those who were stoned and sawn in two, and their houses were stolen, their property was confiscated, and it says the world was not worthy of them because they kept their pledge to God. They honored Him. Jesus said that those famous words, if someone slaps you on the cheek, do what? Smack him back. Turn the other cheek. And we're living in a culture of smackdowns, aren't we? I mean, isn't that what we like to read? So-and-so smacks down so-and-so in a news conference. The internet is full of that. Social media is full of that. And so many things we need to cleanse our hearts of. And here's the dilemma we have in this passage because we're going into it. And we see it a little bit in this passage, is that there are no heroes in the Bible except for Jesus. Every one of them has clay feet. Every one of them at some point abandons. Abraham lied. Moses was fearful and disobeyed. We have David, we have Solomon, Peter, and Paul. Every single one of them are simply men like us, and they fail. But there are many things we can learn from them. So here's the dilemma we have, and maybe this rings a bell for you. What do you do with people or leaders who have disappointed you or failed you or have fallen miserably? What do you do with that? Well, let me give you just one example, or perhaps one way. When I was in my 20s, I got married, moved to Denver, and came to a church that really changed and really transformed me, and a pastor who was a mentor to me. And so from 22 to 32, I was under this man's leadership and learned a ton from him. He had an interesting way of mentoring. His mentoring was, I call it the Darius method of discipleship. Darius took Daniel to the lion's den and threw him in there and said, I'll come back in 3 days. Well, that's what Frank did with me. He said, do you know anything about junior hires? I said, no. He said, I don't either. They're yours. Later he said, could you quit your job for the summer so you could take these kids on a youth trip? Sure. Can you be the janitor and the youth director all at the same time? Sure. He kept throwing me into these things, and that's really what I needed. I'm an adventurer. I took it as a challenge. I watched this man preach in a way that I had not seen before, not so much the exposition of it, but the motivation of it. He had an amazing gift to move people. And while I was there, I saw a whole new vision of the church, that we started an international students ministry. We opened up a home for unwed mothers. We had all kinds of, we had a street people ministry and a coffee house, and we had multiple congregations, and he was constantly talking and motivating people to build teams and go out there and do the ministry. It's where I get my phrase, we are the living church out there. He called it the church unleashed. And so I was under his spell, under his leadership, and saw many, many good qualities in his life. And then I left. He sent me to another church. About after 10 years, the church came looking and said, "Can we get some help?" They asked me to come as their pastor, and I said no. And they asked me a second time. I said no. And Frank said, "Well, maybe you should listen to them." So we went together and listened to them. And this was a church that had been in decline for 20 years, and it was a sea of bald heads and white hair. And I was 32. I looked like I was 17. And anyway, one thing led to another, and Frank commissioned me to go there and sent 40 people with me. And God did a great work in that. So he was catalytic in my young pastoral life. So I came here to Berean in 1991, and I was going to go back in that summer, to Denver Seminary to teach a course in something. It's really an important subject. That was the nature of the church. And I came to the seminary, and the first day I was there on campus, 3 guys walked in to my classroom and said, "We're elders at this church that you've served with Frank. And we want to tell you that last night we met him at the airport, and we confronted him with multiple affairs that he's been having for the last 10 years. And so he has stepped aside, and you've been gone from our church for a while, but everybody knows you there. So would you come and preach on Sunday and tell people what's happened?" Well, that was a real thump for me. I had learned so much from him. The nature of the church was formed in watching and working alongside him and trusting him and watching him. I wasn't him. I didn't try to be him, but he was a gifted guy. What do you do when you are disappointed with the flaws of a leader like Frank? Or anybody, or David? Well, my conclusion of that was, what he said that was true is still true. And the tragedy is that he was skewered on his own spear, which was the truth. And so I've made that decision many times in my life, and I hope you've made that about me. That even when you're disappointed, if what is said is true, then that truth is still true, no matter who the messenger is. It doesn't mean you keep following that messenger. It doesn't mean that you welcome them back at your kitchen table, or that you coddle lies and deceit. But what it does mean is, if it's true, then it's still true. We're going to see that in the life of David. And as you go forward, you're going to see more and more of the mixture of some of David's confusion. But here we see this example of a man who is a man of honor. So here's the question: how can I be a man of honor like David? Let me just give you 2 quick applications that really can go all kinds of places on this very day, and especially even as you pray for each other in a few minutes. First of all, honor God's timing. Honor God's timing. Wait for his timing. The Bible is full of people who didn't wait. Abraham didn't wait, and so he went to Hagar. Here we have an example, at least, that David waited. I want my hot water in 5 seconds. I want that green arrow out there to turn when I get in the lane. I want the screen to come up in milliseconds. I want solutions to my problems when I Google it. We want it. Come on. We're impatient people. I'm an impatient person. But your kingdom may not come on your timing. In fact, it hardly ever does. We honor God by honoring His timing. The prophet might be down the road. Your healing might take time. Your marriage may need an investment over and over and over again until you see the fruit of it. Your child may need another year to mature. Am I willing to wait for God's timing and to be the man I need to be while I wait? Second application is to honor God's manner. I think about Philippians chapter 2 and these words that really level us when we recognize how important they are. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. To be humble, to think of the other person, to honor God with our speech and the tone of our speech, to honor the manner in which He wants things done. I think in David's case, when he cut off the corner of Saul's robe, he was acting in a manner that was unpleasing to God and that violated his own conscience. He rectified that, but how many times do I have the opportunity to respond in the manner that God wants me to do, which is from a peaceful and quiet spirit before the Lord, and then to speak in ways, to act in ways that show that it's not about me, it's about what God wants me to do. We do all this because we want to have an honorable life and we want to have a clear and clean conscience. And our conscience can often tell us something's not quite right here. And I need to confess that to the Lord and then rectify it because I have people following me. And I think that's the beautiful thing I gained from this passage is that David knew I have men following me and they need to know and I need to speak out what it is that's in my heart in case they haven't heard it before. And even if they've heard it before, they need to hear it again, that Saul is the Lord's anointed and I'm not going to take his place until the right timing comes along. So these are things for us to ponder, and I've got some questions for you around your tables, and then when the time comes, take some time and pray together. Get in a group of 2 or 3 and pray over each other because there may be a decision you want other men to pray about, or there may just be something that you need to clear your conscience and say, Lord, this is what I want to do today. Despite the fact I've crossed the line at some point, I want to come back and honor you, and I want others to know that. So men, let's do that. Let's do the work around the tables of close, vulnerable conversation, and God bless you as you do it.